about the people that are on the boards of directors of these organizations that run the media, everything from AP on down to NBC and CBS and so on and so forth? You mentioned that before.
You know, 10 major media corporations in the United States. They in turn have 118 people on their boards of directors who sit on 25% of the corporate 1,000 in the United States. So it's a very corporate top-down media system. Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, the Carlyle Group, Bechtel, all have people on their boards who sit on the boards of the major media groups. So you basically have a military media industrial complex in the United States that profits from war.
So when you say profits from war, can you give me some examples of somebody that is on the board of directors of a media corporation? And there he is, he breaks out his notes. There he goes.
Well, yeah, you remember.
Tracking
You're
the
supposed to
global
know all of this.
domination project.
Yes, exactly. Name all 280 people on the global dominance group list. Right, here comes the
William Kennard from the Carlyle Group's on the New York Times board. Douglas Warner III is from Bechtel, and he's on the NBC board. John Bryson from Boeing is on the ABC board, and so is Allison Lewis from Halliburton, and then Douglas McCorkindale is on the Gannett board. So that's 5 of the 10 top media corporations with closely interlocked with the biggest military contractors in the United States. In the world, I mean.
And isn't there some sort of like law about war profiteering and media and free press and that kind of thing that governs that?
No. There's no laws that govern. It's not even against the law to lie to the American public on major television.
And they do it often.
I mean, yeah, and they can do it deliberately. I mean, that was Fox's defense against the Monsanto, that whole thing with Steve Wilson and Jane Acree, where they sued them for lying and that they were whistleblowers and lost their jobs for the bovine growth hormone in milk. Fox's defense was it's not against the law to lie to the American, lie on television. That was their defense. So they didn't have whistleblower status. They didn't violate any laws, and Fox won. So there's FCC rules that say you're supposed to tell the truth, but there's no regulation or police service that monitors that.
Because it seems like what you're doing with Project Censored is 2 really important things at the same time. One of them is reporting, giving the actual news stories that haven't been brought out into the mainstream media. And that's really a crucial point, just in terms of,
which we've been doing for 32 years.
Right, just keep on, sort of like filling in the gaps that are left, probably purposefully in many ways, and whatever the mechanics are behind that. And then the other one, which I find the most interesting part of what you're doing, is that by showing what's not being covered, you're doing almost like a meta media project, in that you're analyzing the media's relationship to its content or its lack of content. So I was wondering whether you would speak a little bit to what you've learned individually about the role of what are called maybe gatekeepers or of progressive media that will also not cover stories. Because I remember you all did a story on that, or did a study about that.
We did a study on the progressive media inside the corporate, the propaganda model, Chomsky and Herman's propaganda model. There was a 20-year anniversary of the propaganda model conference up in Windsor, Canada, 2 summers ago, and we prepared a paper for that and we presented, and it ended up being a chapter in our book, and where we looked at the top left progressive Democracy Now! and Mother Jones and Z Magazine, and at the different at 8 different stories that had been validated. They were certainly truthful stories. 3 of them were about 9/11 and how the corporate media, the left progressive media, had covered them. Some hadn't covered them at all. Some had covered them negatively, and some of them had had good coverage. So we saw very good coverage on election fraud. We saw pretty good coverage on various issues where we're seeing are the sensitive issues. Israel-Palestine, like the death rates between the Palestinians and Israel, was a big story a couple of years ago. Very little coverage in left progressive media on that issue.
What three were 9/11? I know you've gone through this before, but
Building 7, of course, and the pre-warnings, and then NORAD's failure. And all three of those are well scientifically laid out, factual, serious contradictions to the 9/11 Commission report. It should be being reported inside of progressive left media, and some of them are completely staying away from it. So our goal is to validate independent news stories and really try to bring a cultural transformation about, so that people recognize that the corporate media is irrelevant to working people in the United States. That it's a propaganda machine for the most powerful entities, corporations, and government in the world. That most of what they're broadcasting as news is pre-packaged spin put together by Omnicom or WPP or Interpress public relation firms. Those are the three biggest in the world.
Say them again.
Omnicom, WPP, and Interpress. And they have 175,000 employees in every country in the world who will build news stories. And they take clients, so it can be the Israeli government, it can be the State Department, the Pentagon. The Pentagon spends $1 billion a year on public relations firms, spinning news stories. They're creating news stories. So what we're getting in corporate media is literally what they accept. They're running it verbatim. So that's how we get the talking points around Israelis' invasion of Gaza, all looking the same on corporate media in the U.S. You've got to go to Electronic Imputata or some other independent source, Al Jazeera in English, to see a different perspective or a different side of what's going on. And so validating those news stories and then having a place where people can get news from independent sources that have been validated by universities is part of the media cultural transformation that is emerging, really a renaissance of independent media, not only in the United States but the world. And that's emerging now as an option and a counter to the corporate media and that top-down propaganda machine that we're all faced with on a daily basis.
How many different forms does it come in besides just in terms of perception management? CIA's perception management, whoever's perception management, the Pentagon. How many different forms do you think it comes in besides television and the newspaper and
it's
magazines?
Everywhere. It's in the movies, it's in newsprint, it's in press releases, it's in books.
Can you give me some examples of some movies and some books?
I don't go to the movies that much.
Me either.
This might seem like an obvious question, because it is, but I think it needs to be asked anyway. Why doesn't the media report things like that the Pentagon spends $1 billion on marketing?
I think the primary reason is that the media's in the entertainment business. So they're filling us up with the latest on Paris Hilton and OJ and celebrities and the most gruesome murder stories that could have been across the country, and it'll be on the front pages here. And that has an emotional content. They're trying to get us hooked emotionally to continue to watch, so they're selling our viewing to advertisers.
Don't you think that 9/11 was an inside job, and that the CIA, the Mossad, the FBI, and the Department of Defense, and the Secret Service all had something to do with it? Might be a huge story that people would be drawn to their televisions to watch?
It's a very good question.
Well, there's the stories, the biggest psychological barrier to really asking that question, was 9/11 an inside job? It is this idea that our government wouldn't do anything so evil. Mm-hmm. And then that's a relationship between a person personally and our government, meaning that this is us. That I wouldn't do anything that evil, therefore our government wouldn't do anything that evil. We can't even make that question. We call it a threshold concept,
right.
Meaning that you can't cross into that dark closet and open the door and go in there and ask the questions. So that's psychologically the biggest barrier, and that becomes almost inside of corporate media a total. You just don't do it. if you're going to keep your job inside of corporate media. You don't question 9/11, you don't question election fraud in 2004 when 9 million votes were different in the voting machines than what the exit poll said. You don't question that 1 million Iraqis have died. You do that, and then you're going to be outside of the parameters of what's acceptable inside of corporate media, and your career's on the line.